Morning.
Good morning, Natalie. How are you?
Baruch Hashem. Thank you. Yourself?
Baruch Hashem. I reviewed a little bit for today, and looks like we're heading in discussion of whether we're gonna of whether they have to pay from the best of the damaging party or the damagers.
That's interesting. We touched on that earlier.
Yeah, but it's like a whole different situation. I don't know, like from what I've been noticing is like every discussion starts off like very slowly, and then they just start adding layers and layers and layers, like endless.
Yeah.
And sometimes the layers come upon like a couple of times, but just like different scenarios.
I think we're right. Oh, I've got the wrong page. We're right at the top of the page, aren't we?
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're ahead of me because I have not looked ahead.
I tried because yesterday it was very difficult for me to try to keep up.
Hey. Hi, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning. So who's the lucky one to give the share today? Do we have any volunteers?
Moshe, you've been doing an excellent job, and we appreciate it. I'm not joking.
I think Rob Morrison is a unanimous decision.
Yeah. Okay. How you doing, Hello?
Baruch Hashem.
Okay.
Got away for a day. I'll be back Friday.
Mitzvah Hashem. Okay. Let's see. We're gonna try to do this.
Are you sitting alone in that room?
Well, not today. Today I have here my son, and I have. There we go, Yosef, and
Oh,
yeah.
good. Okay.
Jeff, yeah. Okay. Got it. We're right on the top here. Okay, so may our learning today give a refuah shalema mitzvah Hashem l'schus all the wounded in Eretz Yisrael,
Right.
Rabbi Smith, and may mitzvah Hashem we zecha to the building of Beis Hamikdash very soon.
Amen.
Okay, so if you remember, yesterday was an interesting thing because Rav and Abaye were arguing about the opinion of Yaakov, was he holding like Rav Yehuda on one or the other? So we're just going to jump right into it. It says, if Rabbi Yaakov is holding like Rabbi Yehuda, that he says in the Mishnah that what? So in order for Rabbi Yehuda, in order for Rabbi Yaakov to hold like the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, he has to call the case of the Mishnah to be that it was actually a tam, and he did shmira, but not a good shmira. He guarded the ox, but not properly, not a good one. And that's why he's chayev, because he didn't do shmira me'ula. So even though the animal is tam, was innocent, but because he didn't watch it well, that's why he has to pay. Ve'il Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and if we say that Rabbi Yaakov holds like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that with a short tam, with an innocent ox, l'shomro shmer prusa, that it actually is enough, and it's okay to watch him with a lower quality of guardianship. Here, so why would he be chayav over here? Del avid le shmira klal, because here we're going to have to say that Rabbi Yaakov is saying that he didn't watch him at all. Each time we're going to have to take it one level lower, and that's why he's chayav. And that's what they say in the Brisa, that really actually is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. The Tanya, as it's written in the Brisa there, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, he said, Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Yaakov, says, Echad tam, ve'echad muad, whether the animal is tam or muad forewarned, sheshamran shmira pchusa pturim, regardless of whichever level of shmir they did, they're patur. Okay, that's what he holds. So Rav Acha Barabba, the son of Abaye, continues this question. That he's saying that which way are we going to assign the brisa to be? Because without it, there's no chiddush for the Mishnah to turn around and say that he was chayav. That was the whole question. Why was the Mishnah even added here? Va'akamash malan, Rabbi Yaakov, and then Rabbi Yaakov comes now to give us the chiddush. The Mamidin Len Apotropin Latam Ligvos Migufay. That because, so what is the Chiddush? Not about the watching, but rather that we would appoint a guardian to be able to collect the damage from the tam from its body. And that's why the Brisa has to talk about Muad, because we're going to be collecting from its body, and that's why we need to have the apotropos. Amarle. So Ravina's answering of Acha, can Rava hold this way of thinking in the Mishnah? And he says, Hachi Kamma Rava. So Rava would actually answer it this way. Because as you remember, Rava and Abaye each were giving a backwards explanation, a different explanation to why this whole brisa was brought, why he had to go and bring what was it? Was it 2 pages before? Where was it? His chiddush, I can't remember. What was his chiddush? Was that he brought that whole case that he said that he would be chayav from his body, and we're asking, what's the chiddush? What was the whole big thing? And Rav and Abai were trying to find out what was the reason that he brought that down in the Mishnah. So Hachi Kamar. So he said, so Rava would answer like this: it's better to put the Mishnah, the Brisa, in one way with 2 reasons. In other words, to say the words of Rabbi Yaakov should be that we would say that Rabbi Yaakov is talking about an animal that's muad, and that automatically answers why he said that it's chayav. Because there are a few extra chidushim, a few extra new things we can learn from it in that particular case. One is that it's enough to have with a muad, a shmira pchusa. You don't have to have a full top quality guardianship. That would be the first lesson learned from him. And he would also say that if he did not have someone to forewarn, then the animal goes back to being tam, like we spoke about yesterday as well. And that's why you would have to appoint an apotropos for that tam to be able to collect Because we said that a tam, if you remember, does not collect from the body. So how would you collect from it? Only if you appointed a guardian for the orphans. But if Rava would have said that the words of Rabbi Yaakov, of the son of Yehuda, were referring to a tam, then there would be no chiddush that you have to appoint the apotropos. It's only because it was a muad. Okay, so that's what Rava is saying. So Ravina now comes to answer now the side of Abaye on Rava, and he says like this. Ravina Amar, that the truth is the first brisa is like Rava. This is so complicated, I'm sorry. And we're talking here about a shor muad. We're actually talking truly about an ox that is muad, forewarned. And it was watched with a shmir pchusa. It was only watched with a low quality guardian watching. And that would be according to the opinion of Yehuda. That's enough with a muad, with a forewarned, to guard it, but not the greatest way of watching it. And the level of its tam holds on to it. He does not lose the quality of being a tam, and that's why he's only paying half the damage of a tam when he's a tam. And that's why you would appoint an apotropos. The second brisa that disagrees with Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Yehuda, they're not talking about the same thing. So it says, Ureshus Mishnah Ika Beinayu. So what really is the argument? Ravina says that they are arguing that if the ownership changes, will the animal return back to be a tam? Remember, we said that was a quiz question about when would you have a muad, a forewarned animal that can return back to being innocent, a tam. And we say that can only happen when the ownership of an animal changes. And that's the big debate that's going on. So in the case when the ox was forewarned and its owner was a cheresh, it was a deaf, and at that same time, as a result, the ox was under the guardianship actually of an apotropos, because the person who was deaf couldn't do it. And one day, the deaf person became cured. And the imbecile became normal again. And the young boy became old. And now, and because they weren't watching the animal until then, and now it suddenly became in their ownership, and they didn't watch him properly. Rav Yehuda Savar, Areu b'cheskasei. Rav Yehuda's holding that it's because it was already forewarned to the apotropos, to the guardian, it's going to remain a muad, and these three guys, the cheresh, shaita, and katan, now they're going to have to pay the nezek shalom because it was already forewarned beforehand. And Rav Yaakov Savar, Rishus Mishan. And Rabbi Yaakov says, no, because the ownership changed, because now once these people change their status and now they get back the animal, that's why the animal returns to become a tam. And they only have to pay half the nezek. The Gemara brings the brisa about the ox of orphans that killed a person and say like the following. Tana Rabbanan, apotropsin, the guardians of the property of orphans, hamimunim al shor hayisamim, that are actually appointed on the ox of orphans, mishalmim al nisk, they have to pay the full amount of the orphans. Min halia, they have to pay it not only from the body of the ox, but actually from the property and the good property of anything of the belongings of these orphans. The en mishalmim koifer. But if the ox killed a person, because normally if someone owns an ox and it kills a person, the owner has to pay an extra kofar, it's an extra penalty for this type of damage. But in this case, because it was under a guardian, then the guardians do not have to pay the kofar. So the Gemara asks, Man tana kufra kapara, bias melav b'nei kapara ninu. Who is the Tana that holds this opinion in the Brisa that says that the payment of the kofar is actually a kapara. It's an atonement for the owner of the ox who killed the person. And that's why, in this case, because the owner cannot pay it because they're orphans, and therefore you cannot force the apotropos to pay it. So who's the one who makes this kind of split type of an opinion? Amar Rav Chisda says, he says that the Tana that holds that opinion is Rabbi Shmuel b'nosh Rabbi Yochanan ben Brokai. It's Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yochanan, the son of Broka. Because we learned in a different brisa about the way that kofer is paid. It's brought down in the pasuk in Shmais. If kofer, if that extra penalty will be appointed on him, and it says there, "V'nasan pidyon nafshoy," that penalty payment of kofer would actually be for the purpose of redeeming his soul, meaning we see that it's an atonement, and the kofer itself is actually demei nizak. That's the money as damaged money that we have to pay because he was killed. He was killed by the ox. It says, however, Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, says that this kofer, this amount, demei mazik, the money that the damager is going to pay, has to be the value as the owner of the ox. So just to put things into perspective, if there was Reuven and Shimon, and Reuven's ox, chas v'shalom, went ahead and gored Shimon and killed him. So there's the damage, right? There's the penalty that he has to pay. But then there's kofer, and that is the amount of value of Shimon. Sorry, of Reuven. Reuven killed Shimon. So the value of Reuven, that's an extra amount of money that he has to pay to the family of Shimon. Why? To redeem his soul, because his animal killed Shimon. And this is to actually redeem him from, the Gemara is saying, from Misa Bidei Shamayim. Because even though we're not going to kill Reuven because his ox killed someone, but he's chayav Misa Bidei Shamayim. He's actually chayav to die in the court of heaven. No, because he didn't kill it himself. No, I don't think it's that level. And that's why he does not have to. Okay, but he still has to have a kapara, an atonement for his soul, and that's why he has to pay what's the value that he's paying here? Reuven's paying the value of his own life as an extra penalty to the family. Correct. Correct. So in addition to whatever happens to the animal, he has to pay an additional amount, the value of his own body. And Rav Chisda explains further. So maybe this is really what they're arguing about, this opinion. The Rabbanan Savrei Kufra Mamoinahu. That Rabbanan hold that payment, it's just simply a payment of money that you have to pay the value of the one who was damaged or hurt to the inheritors of Shimon, like all other money. So the Chachamim say that the kofer that you pay is the value of Shimon. So the one that got killed by the ox, that's the amount we estimate how much he's worth, and Reuven has to pay that.
In the Mishnah, it uses this word, it's tadin, which is like a stadium. So I was wondering if this is also applied in like one of these like gladiator fights or something. If they have when you kill like. Yeah, it's meant to be.
So, and you're right, but the question is now: do we estimate the value of the one who was killed, and that's the value you pay, or we estimate the value of the owner of the killing ox, and that's the one we pay? So Rabbanan is going to say that we evaluate Shimon, the one who got killed, how much it is, and it's just a payment of money. Rabbi Shmuel, b'nosh Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Sovar, and so Rabbi Shmuel is holding kufra kapara, that this payment is an atonement to the owner of the ox because his ox killed a person. And so it's not only a payment as a penalty, it's also a payment as a penalty. Rav Papa, what?
It's a restitution.
Right, restitution. Rav Papa, he doesn't like this opinion of Rav Chisda. And he says, look, it's that their argument is not debating, is it a atonement or not? Elo de kula alma, the Rav Papa says that everyone agree, even Rabbanan, shekufra kaparai. everyone agrees that when the ox of Reuven is killed, another person killed Shimon, and he has to pay this kofer, that actually is an atonement for Reuven. But what are Chachamim and Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shmuel arguing? Their argument is about Sherabanan Savre B'Dinizak Shaimina, that Rabbanan simply hold that it is a kapara, but what's the amount you have to pay? You have to pay the amount of the value of Shimon.
He was the one killed, yeah?
He was the one who was killed. And that's the kapara for Reuven. And Rabbi Shmuel is saying, Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Bruka Savar, B'Demazik Shaiminan, that you actually have to estimate the value of Reuven himself. But they're both agreeing that kofar actually does mean it's not just a penalty of money, but it's an amount of money to atone for the soul of Reuven.
I could see how it could be the value.
Right, but sometimes, but you.
Yeah?
Okay, but the Chachamim say no, because the whole essence of this atonement was because this person was killed. So in order to atone for that killing, let's estimate what that person was worth, and you should have paid that amount. Okay. So in understanding the argument according to Rav Papa, the Gemara continues. It says, "My Tama de Rabbanan." So why would Rabbanan have the opinion, like you just now were asking, that this atonement penalty will be the estimation of the value of Shimon? Why would they hold that? And the Gemara says, "Shenemra lashon shitza lemata." He says that because when it talks about an ox that is forewarned and it killed a person, so the word there in Shmois, it says in kofer yushas. I mean, if you look in the English, yushas means it'll be applied to something to that effect. I don't know what the English is, but that's what yushas would mean. It would be applied to him. Venemra lashon shisa lemala, and also in the parsha when it talks about the a muad, a forewarned person, animal, when it killed remember if it gored a woman and killed the unborn child, and also over there it says kasher yoshis alav, the amount that would be appointed upon him to pay. So he says we're going to learn from that one shisa to the next shisa. The first one, it talks about the value not of the own. Very cool. I get the chachamim because he says like this: when an ox goes and gores a woman, and the baby comes out and kills the baby as a result because of the goring, the Torah says what you do. She miscarries. It says that you have to pay the value of the fetus or the unborn child. So you're not paying the value of Reuven, who owned the ox. You're paying the value of what you caused the damage to. So he says, and there it was Yushas. So now when we have Yushas, when you just simply killed a person, likewise it has to be the value of Shimon. Okay, that makes sense. Hainu b'denizak. So therefore it's a reference to payment of the one who was hurt. Afkan, this kofer has to be b'denizak. Okay, so we understand the chachamim. Rabbi Shmuel benosh Rabbi Yochanan Burka Savar. So why does Rabbi Shmuel hold the opposite? That you have to estimate that this kapara is referring to Reuven himself, because it says v'notzan pidyon nafsho, because it's talking about it's the redemption of his soul. And whose soul? We're not talking about the redemption of Shimon's soul. We're talking about the redemption of the soul of Reuven. Okay, so that makes sense.
Maybe just to cover all your bases, you could pay for both.
For both, there you go.
Very serious.
Now you're talking. And
Remotion.
yeah.
Do we know how these amounts were calculated?
Well, but usually when it talks about estimating people, it's usually estimating them in the market.
Yeah.
What is in the market? You know, if a person was sold as a slave, a pregnant woman with a child, without a child, a healthy person with his teeth, without his teeth. I mean, there was a very serious market going on in those days. Every element they would check a person, you know, to purchase them. They had all these different 55 points you checked on the guy, you know, and any point that was missing lowered the value of the person he wanted to buy.
Sure.
What? He couldn't get insurance. Exactly. So So if that's the case, if Rab Yishmael was saying the pasuk simply says that you have to redeem your own soul as a result, so why don't Rabbanan hold of that? So Rabbanan don't agree to that. Why? Because he says, even though it's true, they say Pidyon Nafsho Ksiv, that it's to redeem his soul, but nonetheless, Miu Kishai Minan, but Denizak Sheminan. He says, yes, it's all about redeeming the soul of Reuven. We're not arguing about that. But who are we estimating the value of the body to determine how much you have to pay? You have to estimate the value of the one who was damaged. That's it. So it's actually kind of, they solved it in that way. So now, once we were talking about the law of kaifer, of redemption, to the orphans, so now the Gemara continues with a few other questions. Mashbachle Rava l'Rav Nachman, but Rav Acha bar Rav Yaakov, the Adam Godol. So Rava turned around and complimented Rav Nachman. Rava complimented in front of Rav Nachman. He was complimenting Acha bar Rav Yaakov, and he said about him that this guy, he's a very big person in Torah. So Rav Nachman answered Rava, and he said, that when this Acha bar Yaakov comes to you, bring him over to me. I want to meet him. When Rav Acha bar Yaakov came in front of Rav Nachman, Amarle, he said to him, so Rav Nachman said to Rav Acha, Bai mine milsa, ask anything you want from me. Bai mine, so he asked him. So Rav Acha bar Rav Nachman asked the following question. If there was a shor, a muad shor, that's a forewarned, shal shnei shutafim, an ox that belonged to two partners, sheharag adam, that killed a person, ketzad mishalmim kaifer, how do you pay this redemption amount if it was owned by two partners? And what are the two sides of this question? Because if you'll say shemishalim hai kaifer v'hai kaifer, if you're going to say that both of them have to pay it, okay. So now we had, pick the two, Zerach and Peretz, right? So both of them are the partners, and because they killed Shimon, the ox killed Shimon, maybe they both have to pay. And both of them would have to pay the full amount, but then you would have to ask, Kaifer echad amar Rachmana v'lo shnei kaifrim. In the Torah it says that the family of Shimon get one kaifer, one atonement. So you can't turn around and say that both partners have to pay. Because, I mean, the family of Shimon have to get payment, but we don't have to go and overdo it and outgive him from both.
It should be the value of
Right, so they're working both ways. So if you're saying that they're saying which way does it have to go?
One way it works, the other might be
Okay, we'll see. They have to get only one. So are we saying that both Zerach and Peretz both have to pay? So let's say that Shimon was worth 100 dinar. Both partners have to pay 100, so the family of Shimon get 200. We say that you can't be because the Torah says the family get one. If you want to say chetzi kofer, that each of the two partners are only going to pay 50-50, but then you'll ask, this is kind of easy what you're going to ask. The Torah said kofer shalom amar Rachmana, that a person has to pay a full atonement for himself. And here each one of them is only paying half. So what are we going to do? V'lo chatzi kofer. It doesn't say that you only get away with half. So they're not sure. So the Gemara tells the following: So while he was doing this, Rav Nachman decided to investigate, to look into this, because he wasn't sure of the answer. So while he was looking into it, they asked Rav Acha another question. And they said to him, we learned in the Mishnah in Erchin, Chayve Erchin memashkinin oisan, Chayve chatos v'ashamos en memashkinin oisan. What does that mean? If a person turned around and said, my value of my personal value, my value, or the value of someone else, I'm going to give to the Beis Hamikdash, as the Torah says. So the bookkeeper, the financial director of the Beis Hamikdash, can go over to him and Lemashkano can actually go and take that person and like temporary sell him to get that money. In other words, the mashkano means actually to go into his house and to force him to pay the amount that he said, whether the value of his own personal himself, or if he said, I want to give you the value of simcha over there, so they can go into his house and collect, because that amount is not a kapara, it's not an atonement,
Moshe,
and because it's not an atonement, we're worried he won't pay it. When you're worried that chas v'shalom, I'm going to lose Gan Eden, I'm in trouble. So a person tends to be a little bit more quicker to give his charity. When it's just, hey, I owe you, okay, I'll give it, but mañana, I didn't tell you which year. Tomorrow, I didn't tell you which year I'm going to, am I right? Mañana, yeah, mañana, I promise, right? Okay, so that's why when a person says, I'm going to give you money, my own value or the value of someone else, they go in and collect. So we're seeing what they're building up. We don't know yet. So he's saying, so that's when it's with erchin. That's when a person is just simply committing himself to give money. However, when a person did an avera and he has to bring a korban chatas or an osham, because that sacrifice is coming now to atone for that person, we're not worried that he's going to hesitate to bring it. So we don't have to go into his house and say, hey, you did this avera, and therefore you have to give this kapara, and it's already been 1.5 hours, we're collecting on you. We're not worried because we know that he's going to pay it regardless. So that's, okay, so now Rav Acha is asking Rav Nachman the following. When a person has to give a koifer for his ox, killing and a person, what is it? Is it like erchin, or is it like chatas? Is it like erchin that it's simply an obligation to atone for yourself? Because remember, he's not getting killed for it. It's just bidei shamayim. It's only at the court of heaven. So is it therefore something that the beis din have to come into his house, into Reuven's house, and collect the money? Or is it like a chatas that we know that Reuven's going to do it anyway because he wants the atonement, so we don't have to go after him? So that's the question. Now, the two sides of the question, and I just now said it, but I'll read it inside. Kevante kaparahu, if it's an actual atonement, ke chatas v'asham dami, therefore it should be similar to a chatas, a korban chatas, and what in that case, the beis din don't have to go into his house to collect the money for that korban because it's a kapara. We know he's going to pay it, and that's why he's machmir chamer lava. And therefore we know that he's going to be very strict with himself and pay that kofar because he wants to atone for himself. And therefore the Beis Hamikdash, the financial director doesn't have to come and harass him and go and take his belongings to collect the money for it. Or Dilma, or rather, it could be because this whole obligation to pay the kofar is simply to connect him to the nizak, the one who was damaged. Mamonahu, v'lo gavohu. This money is not being paid to the Beis Hamikdash. This money is simply being paid to the orphans, to the family of Shimon, to help him out because his animal did, and therefore it's only a financial obligation, and it's not an obligation to pay it as kedusha to the Beis Hamikdash. Mamonahu v'lo chamer alei uvayla mishkan, and that's why he would not be very strict about fulfilling that payment. And that's why we're going to have to go and collect the money. We're going to have to send the guy into his house. That's the question. Iname, he says, and there's actually another reason why that they would have to go into his house and collect the money. Kivandu lo chata umamone hud azik. Because in fact, it wasn't him. It wasn't Reuven who did any avera here. Reuven is a very holy guy. He was sitting in shul. He was in yeshiva learning. He just didn't watch his animal very well, and his animal caused it. It was his money that caused the damage. So that's why the atonement is not as secure, and that's why we would have to go in and collect the money from him because he wouldn't feel that he really has to do it.
I love that people should
Be so
pay
specific,
for
right?
Things that are in Shemaim.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Well, talk about yourself. I'm trying. Lo chamir milsal alave, and that's why he wouldn't be so strict on himself to pay it. Uvay mashkin, and that's why he would have to go after Reuven's belongings to make sure that he pays. Okay, so now Rav Nachman is now being hammered with questions. Amar le Rav Nachman Ravacha. So Rav Nachman is saying back to Ravacha, Shavkan, enough. Stop asking me questions. I already have your first question, and I don't have what to say. Okay, you're throwing questions at me, and I don't have answers for you. The Gemara brings a brisa about the changing of ownership, and it goes like this: Tana Rabbanan, our sages say, ask, Shalu b'cheskas tam. If a person goes and he borrows from his friend an ox, on condition, or as it's known at that time, that the animal is not forewarned. It's a tam. But once he gets it, v'nim samuad. Once he gets it, boom, this animal goes and starts to gore, and it becomes a muad in his possession. And it actually turns out that it was already muad under the original owner from the one he borrowed it from.
You didn't tell him.
But he didn't tell him. So now he borrows an animal that's a muad to gore other animals. So what happens? So he says, in that case, the owners, haba'alim mishalmim chatzi nezek.
Not the whole message.
The owners pay only half, and the borrower, v'shoyel mishalem chatzi nezek.
He didn't do anything.
So it's brought down there. Well, yeah, it would. Huh? Right. Okay. So the Gemara is saying that the owner pays half the nezek and the borrower pays half the nezek. Now, if the animal was a tam when it was in the house of the owner, and it became shu'ad b'veis hashoel, but what happens if it was actually truly a tam when he borrowed it? But when I received it in my possession, that's when it became muad. It was forewarned and became a
We
muad.
talked about this yesterday or the day before. Does it reset the status in the Kamma
Right.
Daf?
Okay, so if it happens now in my possession, and it happened 3 times.
Okay. Oh yeah.
Whoa. This one. So, okay, so I go and borrow an ox. I borrow Yosef's ox, a nice cutie, right? But as soon as it gets into my possession, once, twice, 3 times, and it turns muad while it's to me. And I'm saying, you know what? This ox stinks. I don't want it anymore. Take it back. So you gave me a tam, an innocent ox, simple ox, and I'm giving back to you now an ox that's muad, right?
You didn't cause it though, did you?
It was in my possession. Remember, we're talking about possession. Remember, the Gemara now is debating if ownership changes, does it change the status of what it was? Okay? So now what happens? So I give it back to the owner, and after I give it back to Yosef, what happens now? It does go again. So now it says that in that brisa there, it says the owner, Ba'ali mishalmim chatzi nezek, the owners pay half the nezek, and in fact, I'm exempt, and I don't have to pay anything. Why? Because it left me, it's out. It changed the new ownership. As far as I'm concerned, it's a tam now. It's innocent because it's now in it. So the Gemara is explaining this further about the first part. Mar says, Shalu b'cheskas tam. If someone borrowed an ox while it was tam, v'nim muad, but it was found out after he borrowed it that it actually was muad b'bali, and it was already forewarned by the owner. So mishamim chatzi nezek. So the owners pay half the damage. V'shel chatzi nezek, and the one who borrowed has to pay. So the Gemara asks, "V'amai, why? Why should the borrower have to pay for anything? Le'malei, let the borrower say to the owner, it's your she'eli arya. No, Torah she'eli, arya lo she'eli. I went and borrowed from you an ox. I didn't borrow from you a lion. As an expression to say that it's not my fault that this ox was goring. So why does the Bryce turn around and say that the owners pay half and the borrower pays half? So
I don't think we ever got into any about borrowing.
Right, so that's what I'm saying. This is like, again, but now they're going into all these nuances, which ultimately make it very complicated. So Amarav, Rav answers that in that case, the owners have to actually pay the entire nezek. When okay, so what happens? And so why in the Brisa there it says that the owner pays half and the borrower pays half? So he says like this: what are we dealing with over here? That will cause the borrower to pay half the damage. It's talking about shehekir boshu nagcha, meaning when he borrowed it, not that he knew that it was muad, but he knew because ultimately, what does the muad really mean? When the ox goes and physically goes and gores another animal, right, and does the damage, but sometimes you can see this ox simply going into the wall and banging a wall, going into the bushes and banging bushes. It's like constantly moving its head. So you can see already that it has the nature of wanting to gore. So it says, when you borrowed this animal, and it was very clearly, you could see that this animal was not a simple, innocent little animal. And it was always trying to gore. It didn't gore, but it was always trying. So you already knew about it and you still borrowed it. That's why you have to pay half the damage. Even if he didn't know that it gored 3 times before. So that's why, because he saw it, he would have to pay. So the Gemara says, V'nei but still, the borrower can say to the owner, Tam she'ile, mo'ed lo she'ile. The borrower can technically still say, I intended to borrow an ox that was innocent, and not one that was forewarned and is a muad, right? So the Gemara answers Mishum de Amarle, because the owners now can turn back to the borrower and say, Soif Soif, Itam Have. He could say to him, because at the end of the day, if it was Tam, Pal Ganiska Bai Shlume. He says, in fact, if you did borrow an innocent ox, what would happen? And it gored under your watch, you would have to pay half the damage. You would have to pay half the damage. So now that it turned out to be muad, I'm paying half, but you also have to pay the half.
Is this in reference to this ox killing someone, or is this just basic damage?
It's from what I'm seeing here, it's only basic damage. So because you would have had to have paid anyway, Pal Ganiska Bai Shalom, you would have had to pay had it been Tam. Hashtanami Zio Shalim Pal Ganiska. That's why now you would have to still pay half the damage. So the Gemara asks, B'nei Malay, and maybe the borrower again would turn back and say to the owner, Itam have mishtala migufay. He says, I would have to pay half the damage, but you know from where? From the body of the ox. So it wouldn't be from me. It's under my responsibility. I would have to sell it and collect it and pay it, but it would be paying from you because the ox is yours, right? So again, the owner, the borrower is saying, I don't want to pay half the damage, right? So why is that Bryce saying that the borrower has to pay it? So the Gemara answers, Mishum de Amarle, because the owners can respond to the borrower and say, Sof, at lav Torah bais shlomi ledidi. Because even if they're going to collect the half of the damage from the body of the ox, you would still have to give me a different ox under the ox that was now being sold, because I gave you a full ox. Cool. Yeah. My ox would have to be paid off and half of it gone, but I lent you a whole ox. So when the time for this borrowing is up, I don't care. You have to give me back a full ox, mine or another one. So that's why the half of the damage, even though it's coming from the body of the ox, which happens to be mine, but it's your responsibility because you would have to have given me back a full ox anyway. So therefore, the half is yours. So the Gemara says, wow, this is unbelievable. The name that the borrower can say to back to the owner, and he'll say it like this: Itam have modino patrina. If actually your animal was tam, then I would have admitted in the Beis Din that this ox gored before witnesses came, and then I would have been patur completely, because we say that the half nezek of a tam is a knas. How do you say knas in Hebrew? In English? No, a fine. So the half nezek that we make the tam pay is called a fine. And there's a beautiful statement in Torah. It says, "Maide b'knas potter," that if you admit it before you're accused of it, you're excused from it. So that once again, the borrower would have said to the owner, "You're trying to tell me I would have had to pay the whole thing." As soon as it gored, I would have ran to the Beis Din, pull out the judge in his pajamas and says, "I'm admitting the ox did it, and therefore, because I'm admitting, I'm exempt from my half damage." So I'm again off the hook. And even according to the opinion that says that half the nezek is not a fine, but actual a penalty of money, he still would not have been exempt with his admission. Nonetheless, Nemale, still the borrower could have said to the owner, "Itam have mariknale lagma." He says, what I would have done if your ox was innocent, I could have gone ahead very quickly and chased the ox to go to the pasture, and meaning I would have lost him, taken him into the forest and let go of the leash, and he would have disappeared. So you could never have collected the half damage from its body anyway, right? So it wouldn't have been for me, and therefore I would have been off. Okay, because a tam, you only pay from the body of that animal, and if the animal's not there, you're not going to have to pay. So this bar was not a ukulele; he was a big Talmid Chacham. This bar,
the borrower,
he really knew it all.
I understand this. It seems like the borrower's kind of.
Well, he's trying to get off the hook.
Yeah, he doesn't have to really pay.
Well, he's trying. He said, "Why should I pay? I borrowed something." And each time when the owner says, "Yeah, but you would have to pay this," you have to. He keeps on finding a good excuse why not. So the Gemara now does the following. It limits the way in which a borrower has to pay the half damage, even if he didn't know that the animal was muad. So it goes like this. So then so ultimately, why do we have the situation in this brisa that we're saying that the borrower has to pay half damage? He found all the excuses of the book, and therefore he technically shouldn't. So why does the brisa say that he has to? Here we are dealing with kigon de akdim be dina v'tafse. So the brisa here is talking about that as soon as the animal gored, before he was able to run and admit, the police came and caught the ox. And the borrower did not have time to let go of the leash and let it loose. So we have the animal in possession. Therefore, we're going to collect half the damage from the body of the animal. And now he has to give back a whole ox back to the owner. And that's why he's going to have to pay. Okay. So now the Gemara asks, Ihachi, if that's the solution, this is such a Tetris. If that's the solution, meaning that the Beis Din caught the ox from the hands of the borrower, of the one who borrowed it, Baalim Amai Mishalim Chatzi Nezek. So why should the owner have to pay the half damage? Namely, he can turn around and say, At paste letora bidei mandalo matzina leshtai dina behai. In other words, atafasta shri biad mi. Oh boy. So he's blaming the borrower, the one who borrowed the ox, that he allowed it to be caught by the Beis Din. If it was in your possession, you should have been much more careful to watch over it. And therefore, because you allowed it to be caught by the Beis Din, and because of you now, the animal's going to have to be sold and taken half the damage, you are fully responsible. So the Gemara answers, Mishum da'amar le, because the borrower once again can answer. He says, Ihadrate nahalech lav mina chabishak lele. Because even if I would have returned the animal directly to you, and the Beis Din the Beis Din then would have come and collected from you. So now that they caught it from me, I didn't cause you any damage. They would have come after you. It doesn't make a difference who they caught it from. They would have still come after this animal to collect half the damage. So the Gemara says, V'nei malei, but still the owner could have turned around to the borrower and says, Ihadratele, hadarte nehale have mariknele laagma, because if you would have given it to me, I would, before the Beis Din caught it, I would have chased it to the pasture, and I would have got it lost, and then I would not have had to pay. And since you were the one who didn't watch it well, and that's why it caused the damage. Okay, now that they caught it by you, you should be responsible, because if I had it, I would have chased it away. So the Gemara answers, Mishum da Amar Le, because the borrower can respond to the owner and say, Sof, Lav Ma'aliyah have mishtalme. Because at the end of the day, this animal was not tam. It actually was muad. It actually was forewarned. Okay, and therefore the damage that we're collecting should actually come from your belongings, and you wouldn't have gained anything by sending it off to the pasture. So the Gemara says, Hanicha heicha de'eslei nechse. So that answer could work only if the owner has other possessions to be collected from, and therefore the borrower can turn around and say that if he chased it to the pasture, they would have collected the basing from his belongings. However, heicha de'leslei nechse. But if the owner does not have any possessions to be collected from, ma'ikala meimar. What could he say? He had no money to collect it, and therefore, by sending it to the pasture, there would have been no way for the Beis Din to collect it. And the truth is, in that case, that the owners would not have had to pay. So the Gemara says that the Mishum da Amar Le, because the borrower can respond to the owner and say, Ki heicha de mishtadel ledidach, that because the same way I'm obliged to return the ox completely to you, so I am also obligated to pay the ox to the one who was damaged by it. And this law we will learn from the Rab Nassan, as it says to the Tanya, Rab Nassan Omer minayin l'noishe b'chavero mane b'chavero. Where do we find this? Where do we see that if Ruvain had a claim of money against Shimon? Okay, and he lent him money, and Shimon had a claim of money against Levi. Where do we find that you'll take the money from Levi, and that money, rather than stopping by Shimon, will directly give it to Reuven, because Shimon anyway owes money to Reuven. Okay, and in that case, what we're saying is that the money that Levi owes to Shimon is actually already locked in ownership to Reuven, because Shimon owes that same amount to Reuven. Talmud Loimar legabe guys, that when it comes to stealing and swearing falsely, as it says in the pasuk, v'nasan la'asher asham loy, that we give back the money to the one who the money belongs to. So from here we see that even though Levi didn't do anything to Reuven, but nonetheless his money was obliged to him because he owed him the money. So we can see that one can go to the other. And therefore, this borrower would have to pay the money to the one who was damaged. And he can't say, oh, I could have chased it away, because the borrower now had an obligation to pay the damage that the ox that belonged to the owner caused. So even though it's not his own, but because he owes money to the owner, and the owner now is going to owe the money to the one who got damaged, the borrower now has to pay. Wow. Okay, we'll do just 2 more lines here. So the Gemara continues, asks about the Brisa. Maybe we should stop here. This is a new one. Should we stop here?
Yeah.
Naftali, what do you say?
Yeah, because we're getting into a new discussion.
Yeah,
here.
this is a new one now. Wow.
Oh, that was a lot, Moshe. Thank you very much.
Serious stuff here.
You sounds like you put a lot of preparation time in. It's appreciated.
Yeah, big time. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Have a wonderful Shabbos.
You too.
Thank you.
Okay.
Why are we
Hanukkah. But what's today? I don't even know what today is.
Why are we
Today's
talking
Thursday.
about Shabbos
Oh,
already?
it's still another whole day
Thursday.
for Friday. I can't wait for Rabbi Smith to be better.
I'll bet.
I'm already praying that it's Friday. Oh, you give up. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Afreach and Hanukkah. Okay. Take care.
What does he have?
He has a virus or something. Yeah. Okay. Who had the Vesha? Where do we? I just want to see where it is. Where do we get up to? I need to see it. 1 second. This one's over here. Who had the Vesha? Okay, I got it. It's right in the middle of the page. Who had the Vesha? Got it. We could have gotten just a little bit more, but we did good. Opa.
Wow. Those days it was an ox, the way it is today. Or is an ox today is a castrated bull.
You know what?
fine, yeah, okay. Okay.我操，我操，我操，